Recently, this picture went viral on social media. This happened after Elon Musk took over Twitter. Some people were quick to point out how this picture was full of mostly men, while others noticed something else. A lot of those people were probably foreign nationals that were on a visa that made it hard for them to leave. And that visa is called
H1B visas.
Increasing the H1B visa program that made it possible to bring in these foreign workers.
This visa has been a major point of contention across the political spectrum. Let's first start off with how it came into existence. In 1952, Congress passed a law that introduced the H1 category. This allowed foreign workers to come temporarily into the United States. Then in 1990, this happened.
I'm pleased to sign S-358, the Immigration Act of 1990. This bill provides for vital increases for entry on the basis of skills, infusing the ranks of our scientists and engineers and educators with new blood and new ideas.
This makes absolute sense. If you are a global power, you want people who are extraordinary from different parts of the world to be able to come in and work at your country legally. So how did this all go wrong? When the law was passed, it was required that all employers pay the foreign workers the prevailing wage for that position. The employers were also required to show that hiring a foreign worker did not adversely affect hiring a domestic worker. But it didn't really work as expected because companies could still get rid of older employees and they could hire foreign workers under the H1B who did not have the negotiating leverage to match that pay. Then outsourcing firms began to pop up all over the place, which would basically hire a lot of H1B workers and contract them out to American companies at a significantly lower cost than what an American employee would be. While all this was happening, lawmakers began to take a better look at the visa and began to make some improvements to it. If you were a firm that had more than 15% of your workers on a H1B visa, you began to get more scrutiny when you were applying for those visas. However, you see these companies, there's always going to be a loophole. However, and this is a very big however, if you are one of those companies that were heavily reliant on the H1B, you could ignore the exemption of protecting American jobs as long as you did one of two things. You paid the worker at least $60,000 or the worker had a master's degree. This was the exemption that has led to so much problems with the H1B. Whenever you hear about this visa in the news, you always hear about how it is displacing the American worker and how it is exploiting the tech ecosystem since a lot of these visas go to tech companies. But nobody ever talks about how this exploits the immigrant from start to finish. Everywhere in the legal immigration pipeline exploits the immigrant, and I've decided to take that angle and explain it to you. So if you were a new immigrant and you want to emigrate to America legally using your work visa, your own skills, not through marriage or not through illegal means, a first step would be going to school in America. So you are going to school as an international student who often pays the full price of tuition and ends up subsidizing education for the rest of the school. So you are being exploited off the gate by the education system. You have to work twice as hard to get an internship and to find the companies even willing to sponsor your visa. Once you have found those companies and you have gone through the interview process, you get into those companies and you know you do not have the negotiating or bargaining power like your American counterparts. Oh, I forgot to add, before you can even start working, once you graduate, you have 90 days to find a job. And if you do not, you have to leave the country immediately. They can only start applying for your visa during a specific time in the year. And that time is from January to April. During that time, you have to provide the immigration attorneys with an obscene amount of information to prove that you are actually qualified to stay in the country. One of the pieces of information you often have to show is that no American could do this job. And since immigration law is always a little bit behind, some very creative people realized that one of the requirements to show that your job was not displacing an American was to advertise for the job. So some people realized that they could buy out local newspapers in major tech hubs because they realized that those places hire a lot of H1B workers, and by doing so, they could create some kind of commodity around this and jack up prices. So in the application process, not only are you being exploited by the companies who know you cannot negotiate the same as the American worker, but you're also being exploited by the people who want to make as much money off the system. So it's time for you to submit your information and you finally apply for the visa. But wait, there's more. There are 85,000 spots available for this visa, which sounds like a lot, until you realize that 200,000 plus people apply for this visa every year. So there is a 1 in 3 chance that you actually get it. And that chance is even less if you do not have a master's degree because you are not competing for the full 85,000 spots. In fact, someone who filled out my survey said this about her H1B experience. I applied 5 times and was selected in the lottery the 5th time. When that happened, I was already married to a US citizen and applying for my permanent residence that way. Literally, there's an entire industry around how to circumvent the system because only 1 in 3 of you that apply actually end up getting the visa. So let's say you are lucky enough, you are the 1 in 3 to get this visa, and they start the process. It doesn't end there. They still have to go through lots of scrutiny in order to make sure that you actually are qualified for this visa and you do not displace an American worker and everything they outlined. But even if you do, this is where politics begins to step in. During the Trump administration, there was extra scrutiny put in place for H1B visas. And the only people getting rich off this are the immigration attorneys because they had to be paid to respond to all the inquiries from immigration. And let's say that you end up at a terrible job, like you hate this job, this is the worst job ever. You only have a 60-day grace period to be able to find a new job in America or you have to leave. And the worst part of it all is after you go through all of this, you move your entire family, you make all these sacrifices, you work this job you hate, you still become a political bargaining tool and an enemy from both sides. You are not the illegal immigrant who deserves compassion and you are fleeing from difficult circumstances. So it becomes very hard for people to actually advocate for the H1B. And the worst part of it all is that you are paying Social Security and Medicare taxes. So you are paying for the people who don't even want you in the country. You're contributing to a bucket that you will never see. And this is in a good position where you end up at a Meta or a Twitter, like a company that actually wants to keep you there. But if you end up at one of the outsourcing firms where you're explicitly meant to be cheaper labor, you then go through more indignity at work. And the worst part of it all is that you did things the right way. You did not try to cheat the system. You went through the laws, the rules, and regulations, and you still have to go through all of this. I have friends who went to school in Canada, and literally they all are Canadian citizens right now. And I spent 8 years in America, nothing to show for that. And I know that my story is not uncommon. That's why I made this video. And it is very bad if you are an Indian national. Employment-based green cards are capped at 7% per country. So there's a backlog if a lot of people are trying to immigrate from your country via employment. Right now, by some estimates, it will take like 30 years for somebody to get an employment-based green card from India. So you have a generation of young children who grew up in America and that's the only home they know, who basically become like illegal immigrants by the time they turn 18 because they can no longer be under their parents' H1B. So literally, if you're an Indian immigrant, it makes more sense for you to give birth to your child in America and wait 18 years for them to sponsor you for a green card via family reunification than for you to try to go through the H1B route to employment-based green card route, because that will take longer. I made this video because there was nobody ever trying to understand it from the perspective of an immigrant who just wants a better life for themselves and are playing by the rules that they've been dealt with. Whenever this was always talked about in the news, it was always like the American worker versus the foreign worker being manipulated by big tech companies, while in reality, it's most likely 2 different people just trying to have a better life for themselves and companies like lobbying to pay workers less. Whenever I would hear people talking about being displaced by foreign workers, I just thought to myself, you have far more in common with the foreign worker than the actual employers using them against you. My name is Chisom, and I will see you all next time.